State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable, presented by Cox Communications. And now, here's your host, Fred Morgan.
Hello and welcome to the State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable. We have partnered with Cox Communications to talk about business issues and learn a little bit more about business. Today, we're really fortunate to have one of our state legislators from the Lawton, Oklahoma area, Representative John Michael Montgomery, who carried a lot of legislation involving business and is one of the bright young stars of the legislature. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Yes, sir.
Glad to have you.
Yes, sir. I'm glad to be on.
So tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your family and your background.
Right. Well, I was born and raised in the Lawton area. I went to Eisenhower High School, and I did a year at Cameron University before I transferred up to the University of Oklahoma in 2011 and got a degree in international studies. I probably could have minored in history and Russian if I filled out the paperwork, but I didn't quite get there. So, you know, made home down there in Lawton. My dad works at Goodyear. Pretty much the whole family on my mom's side works down there at Goodyear. So
yeah, it's an important business there in the Lawton area.
Yes, very important down there. So I mean, it employs several thousand folks in the area, and you know all the tertiary effects that it has for the community. So it's really really one of our great partners down there. But so I like to read quite a bit. Pretty avid about that, and make sure to try to keep up with what's going on around the world and the world around me, really. So.
Right. And you're 25 years old.
Yes, sir.
You're one of the youngest members of the legislature.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of success for just being so young and coming into the legislature.
Yeah. I've been able to get some things done. Maybe it doesn't move as quickly as I want it to move, but we've had some success with making some improvements to the state's finance system, some different things. Obviously, partnering with our business community to develop and grow the state. Really, that's important to me, and I know it's important to most folks here. So.
Right. So, how did you first become interested in politics?
Oh my gosh, probably, I don't know necessarily politics, but just kind of all the different things that kind of build into it. I mean, I've always kind of had an interest in geography, history, and all these kinds of things that honestly over my whole life has just kind of built into getting here. I think I've always kind of been interested in kind of not just what happens in the United States, but also what's going on in the world around us, because it's it's important to us. We have foreign policy. We've got, obviously the economy, is huge, what decisions are being made, that impact trade and all those kinds of things. I mean, it's definitely an interesting deal. And it's an interesting job or career, I guess.
Yeah.
I enjoy being able to try to help people out as well. Try to put us on a better path than we have been. So.
Well, tell us a little bit about your district.
So Lawton, I represent kind of west and south Lawton. It's a very diverse community. We also have the military base down there. There's so many different backgrounds that people have and upbringings and all kinds of different things, and it's the ultimate melting pot that we have down there. I mean, and I love it. I mean, it's fantastic. It's an honor to represent those folks down there, and I'm glad that they've given me the opportunity to do so.
Well, you've only been there a short time, but you've developed a reputation for being one of the smarter and more thoughtful leaders. I mean, some of the stuff that you have worked on is sort of complicated, and also some of the issues you've worked on may not be the sexy issues that some politicians or public servants really want to go for, but they really are impactful. And what brought you to the idea of doing some of those kinds of things?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's to me, we have to tackle those complicated issues because that's where we're going to make improvements for folks. This is where we advance their ability to succeed in life and make, frankly, our state and our country better when we actually try to tackle those complicated issues. And you're going to have to try again sometimes. When you're dealing with those things. So it's and that's important to me. I mean, I want Oklahomans to be successful. I want my folks back home in Lawton to be successful, and it's my job, I feel, to try to handle those issues and to tackle them. So
I was an urban legislator and very rarely heard from my constituents. You're sort of representing a city, but I'm sure you're also considered sort of a rural legislator. How much do you hear from constituents, and what are the kind of things that you hear?
Yeah. You know, my district's pretty, pretty compact. It's pretty urban. Really tight area. Really, I mean, it's almost the same size as some of these ones here in Oklahoma City. But I hear a lot of different issues. I mean, it's be it education, healthcare issues, and I'd like to think that I'd keep in pretty good contact with them. And I get out and I'll go knock doors and go talk with folks and find out what are their issues. And a lot of times too, it's they're dealing with some kind of the bureaucracy, I guess, if you will, of state government. That's what that's kind of an issue that they may have. Just kind of something in their particular life. But overall, they also want, they want quality education for kids and want, elderly folks to be taken care of, and there to be a sound healthcare system that to be put in place. So the concerns are very diverse as well. So
now you're a Republican, and are you one of the first Republicans or the first Republican to ever serve that district?
I'm the second. From my understanding.
Okay.
T.W. Shannon preceded me.
Of course,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I heard about you during your campaign was nobody outworked you. That you were one of the hardest door knockers of really going out and pressing the flesh and talking to people.
Yeah, that's important to me. I mean, you gotta get out there and you gotta understand what the folks want. What are their interests? What are their concerns? What do they want to see? And also be able to share the message that you have. What is your vision? What are you trying to accomplish for them? And it's important to have that dialogue with them. To build on and to work for while you're at the Capitol.
And you're in the middle of your second term.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we need to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about some of the pieces of legislation that you worked on over the last year or two.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, hope you'll come back as we continue our discussion with the representative from House District 62, John Michael Montgomery. Hope you'll come back and join us. Welcome back to our conversation with John Michael Montgomery, the representative from Southwest Oklahoma. Representative, this was an interesting session to say the least.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Give us your thoughts and impressions about the session as it unfolded, and what are some of the good things you take away from it, and what are some of what's the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of folks that they want to find the ugly in everything. There's they'll easily find the bad. But I think that there were quite a few positive points. We were able to finally pass an audit bill to put our state agencies on a regular cycle of audits to ensure that we're providing the services that people need, and that we're rooting out the things that we don't need to be spending money on and those kinds of deals. There were some reforms in tax credits that it's kind of a difficult conversation to have. There's some conversations around tax issues and things like that. I would caution, as we go forward, not to get too hasty about those conversations when we're having them, and not make decisions that are going to negatively impact the overall economy of the state. I think that particularly in the House, we had some different leadership. It's really interesting to me. It kind of clicked the other day. The Speaker of the House is only one term ahead of me, in terms of being in the legislature. So, we've got kind of some new leadership going on there, and I think they're kind of, testing out some things and kind of working through the process. I think they'll be the first to admit they make mistakes once in a while too, but ultimately I think that, they're going to improve that process with time and just kind of experience as well. And I think that ultimately as things get as the economy improves and as we have a little bit more experience under our belt, there's going to be a lot of good things and positive things I think that'll come out of the legislature in future years as well. So.
It was a tough session. I mean, you had a $1 billion hole and a $7 billion budget. What did you take away from the budget process?
Yeah. Sure. I think with anything, there's definitely room for improvement. I think there's a lot of folks that will admit that. you have folks that we had, frankly, negotiations with folks who haven't been at the table before, and ultimately those did not produce any kind of meaningful fruit, unfortunately. But I think that we need to continue to work together towards kind of a unified vision, if you will. That's kind of my lead takeaway is, from probably the entire session, is that there's not really a unified kind of vision that we have for this state. Everybody's kind of got their conception of what tax policy should look like, or what government spending should be, or those kinds of things. But there's not really kind of a uniform vision, if you will, for us to go forward on, I don't think. And I think that that's causing some of the issues that we're having right now. When you get into these kinds of slumps, you get into these bad times, we haven't really adequately prepared in a lot of ways to deal with these kinds of circumstances. There are measures out there like the rainy day fund and things like that try to help us through, but we've got to put more and better of those kinds of systems in place and ultimately build out a long-term financial plan, a vision, if you will, for what we want to see this state become. So.
Good. That's music to my ears. Along those lines, the House leadership has announced that there will be policy meetings throughout the summer. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that process and what you think that does.
Yeah, I think that any time that we can get together before session and meet and work together is great, honestly, and especially if we can do it without doing it at the taxpayer expense, quite frankly. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we all get a salary. We need to get up here and get to work even earlier on. It's great that, we need to, you have to work for your constituents and help them out with different things, but the best thing that we can do is work on the legislation before session. Ultimately, when we get into session, things get hectic, things get put to the side. You kind of get this tunnel vision, every now and then. That kind of sidetracks some of the things, and so I think that it'll be very important for us to be working on these policy groups through the summer and through the fall. Mm-hmm. I think that it'll set us up for some big wins, hopefully, in years to come. So,
are you going to be active in participating in some of those, and which ones do you think you'll be active in?
Yeah, absolutely. I expect to be fully engaged on all of those. There's a couple that'll be working on budget, apportionment reform type issues, some of the so-called off the top monies. Mm-hmm. We're going to be working on healthcare. That'll be one that I plan to be involved in. How do we deal with healthcare policy and different things like that. I believe there's some others surrounding business commerce issues as well. What does the regulatory framework look like right now? How do we improve it? How do we, how can we work with the business community to advance the whole of the state? And there's a couple others. I believe mental health issues will be on there. Corrections is another one. Mm-hmm. Kind of as a symbiotic relationship there. But there will be a couple more that we'll be working on. But several issues that are important to people.
Now this year you worked on a bill that we worked with you at the State Chamber worked on called the Public-Private Partnerships Act.
Right.
Why don't you explain a little bit about what is a public-private partner? Give some examples and why is it beneficial?
Yeah. So in the state of Oklahoma, we didn't have kind of a formal public-private partnership legislation on the books. The idea basically is that city, county, and even more importantly, the state governments can work with private partners to have services provided that with ideally probably at a lower cost or maybe more efficiently, more effectively. Be able to work with those private partners to provide similar or same services essentially. There's lots of different examples out there. I mean, I believe like waste management is one of them, kind of an alternative to like maybe a city-run trash system, mm-hmm. things like that. There's a whole host of it. I mean, this is really an exciting area that governments are getting into right now to be able to provide these services, make sure that everybody is getting a sufficient service and those kinds of things. But there's all kinds of things. I mean, infrastructure, huge potential here. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited about it. And hopefully it'll lead to some success for our state as well. So.
All right. Well, we may come back and talk a little bit more about that, but we need to take a quick break,
yep.
And we'll be right back with our special guest, Representative John Michael Montgomery from Lawton, Oklahoma. Come back and join us. Welcome back to our visit with Representative John Michael Montgomery. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about your 3P or public-private partnerships, also called 3P legislation. You know, one of my understanding is one of the theories behind that is that the private sector sometimes has, especially in a bad budget year, the private sector may have funds that they can put together in a partnership. They also bring private sector expertise and then to actually perform a state function that's normally done by a state agency.
Yeah, I think that was a huge part of why we needed to pass this legislation this year. It does enable some of the financial components of the private sector who may have been a little bit unsure of the process without something on the books. So I think that it's going to be very important that we'll work with those financial components, and obviously, as you said, some folks that are able to provide same or similar services. Again, I mean, there's a host of potential here, but and again, I'm looking forward to it. So.
Yeah, and a lot of states have been pretty aggressive on implementing public-private partnerships around the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's something that's coming.
Yes, and I think there's a couple dozen at least states that have already put something on the books. A lot of the developing world, a lot of the foreign countries and so on are doing this as well, and they're having tremendous success with it as well. Working with private partners to build roads and bridges and things like. Well, maybe not. That may not happen here, but necessarily. But I mean, there's a significant amount of potential. When you think about ports and things like that. So.
Well, you were also the House author for an update to our General Corporations Act.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what's the point and what does it do?
Right. The idea is that the idea is to unify sort of our general corporation code. This way it makes it a little bit easier for business to be working in different states and those kinds of things, because that's still a state function to establish how to become a corporation, those kinds of things. It was a 230-page bill that that did that. I mean, a lot of very minutiae type deals that were put into that. But hopefully that it'll improve the business-friendly atmosphere that we have here, and enable some of our larger partners to continue to work successfully and to be able to work similarly as they do in each different state in some cases. So.
Right, that's something that we've had before is if a lot of companies operate in multiple states and they would like for it to be somewhat uniform, and this sort of brings some uniformity to the rules of the game.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, and I think of partners like potentially even Goodyear, Chesapeake, Devon, these guys that are operating in multiple states. It makes sense, and just because of the length of the bill, it makes sense for them to be able to operate similarly as they do in other states.
Yeah, it's sort of a complicated bill, and it's been a long time since it's been updated.
Yeah, I believe it's been several years. I mean, probably almost upwards of a decade, possibly, since we've updated. So.
Well, I know you've been very interested in state finance, and what got you interested in finance and debt?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of always been sort of a personal interest, I guess, if you will. I've always kind of been interested in the equity markets and things like that, but and learning about that. Every day you learn something new, really. But ultimately, when I was first getting elected, you kind of you'd see sort of the oil prices were tapering off, and kind of have this and pang in your mind, like, well, this is not going to be good, and so you kind of for whatever reason, I kind of molded sort of the things that I could kind of do on my own side, and looked at where are we at with the state and a lot of different issues, and how can we change and improve different elements of state finance to make sure that we provide the same level of service consistently. So as things played out with the energy downturn, it's been more and more of an interest for me that we've got to make improvements in a lot of these different areas, and there's very frankly pretty simple things that we can do. It doesn't necessarily involve raising taxes or cutting taxes or whatever. There's some pretty easy things that we can do that put us on a long-term trajectory to reduce the volatility, even actually boost revenues in some cases, depending on certain things that we do, of course. But it's very important to being able to provide that consistent level of service. nobody wants to see kind of a generation of kids, suffer from in the education field just because, a couple of years, we had a couple of bust years, but so being able to provide that stability is very important. I mean, it's important for business, it's important for providing services. So.
Well, I know that this is an area that not a lot of people in the legislature spend much time on, but your timing was perfect with the budget crisis and the need to diversify our revenue as a state. It sounds like some of the things you're working on are really going to be important to the state for the future.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm thrilled with revenue stabilization that we passed about a year ago. The idea is when things get above a 5-year average, we'll set aside a little bit of savings for downturns. I think ultimately, though, we need to have a very serious conversation about revenues that are probably not permanent. Probably specifically like the oil and gas gross production revenue. That may not be there in 50 years or whatever the case may be. So we
definitely need to work on that. We need to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with a couple final questions for you. And hope you can stick around. Hope you can stick around too. And as we continue our discussion with Representative John Michael Montgomery. Welcome back to our visit with Representative John Michael Montgomery. Representative, I know that you seem to be enjoying your job. I know it's a challenge, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have about 2,000 bills every year that you have to work on. You seem like a man with a lot of ideas. What are some of the other bills that you may be looking at in the future, or some areas that you want to explore?
Yeah. I'm kind of in track with that finance area. I'm very interested in, frankly, the personal finances of Oklahomans. Right now, not everybody's given the opportunity with an employer-sponsored retirement savings scheme. And this is actually having an impact on, namely, our Medicaid spending. When folks get to that retirement age, they haven't saved up enough, then they're on Medicaid and those kinds of things. So I'm very interested in, how can we work with the private sector on developing, employer-sponsored retirement and those kinds of things. It'd be very important for saving the state some money and possibly, maybe tax reform and those kinds of things. Other areas I'm definitely looking at, tax reform would be great. If we can get something that, obviously the kind of the motto is, broaden the base, lower the rates kind of deal. That's something that we have to work on going forward. And ultimately, I want to play a part in establishing kind of what I talked about earlier, sort of setting up a vision for our state, where are we going to be in 10, 20 years with different parts of our economy and those kinds of things. How have we diversified? Are we prepared well enough, for if things fall off again and those kinds of deals?
We're working on a similar project, and we certainly want to work with you on that. It was a tough budget year. Mm-hmm. The headlines were ugly at times. What do you think next year's budget is going to look like?
I think that there will be some challenges on the appropriated side of the budget. If we don't have a very serious conversation about the apportionment side, I think that's going to continue to impede, what we're able to do with appropriations. There's quite a bit of cash used this year. It's one-time dollars. Some people jokingly refer to it as every-time dollars, but some of those revolving funds are not, rebuilding at the same rate and pace that they were previously. Mm-hmm. So I think that we are going to have some challenges next year, with where we're at and what we're able to do. And it's going to be requiring decisive, reforms to get through it.
Well, you're a good man for doing this, and good luck to you in the future, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for being with us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and hope you'll come back and visit with us again next week as we continue to explore business stories and talk with people involved in business. Come back and join us.
Thank you for watching the State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable, presented by Cox Communications. If you have questions about this program, email the Chamber at okstatechamber.com. Set furnishings provided by Scott Rice, creating effective workspace from the floor to the ceiling and everything in between.